Good evening, my deep dwellers. Nocturne here. Tonight, the Codex poses a rather unsettling question. What happens when we map the world, only to discover our charts were drawn on the back of a sleeping god? We follow Dr. Eric Corbin, a marine acoustician, who believed his instruments had tamed the ocean's mysteries, until something ancient stirred beneath his measurements, and his life's work became a eulogy for the world he thought he knew. And now, let us descend into the Codex of Restless Dreams. Song of the Abyss, Act 1, The Anvil of Silence. The towed array hydrophones had gone deaf. Eric Corbin pressed his headphones tighter against his ears, listening for whale song that should have been there, dolphin chatter that wasn't, and the biological static that usually rose from deep ocean where light died. Nothing. The Pacific dead zone spread beneath the research vessel Pelagic like infected skin, 300 square nautical miles, where something had begun swallowing sound itself. The hull-mounted echo sounder sent its 12 kHz pulse into water that felt wrong, its 256 beam swath mapping the emptiness with surgical precision. Corbin's bathymetric display painted the seascape, the Mendocino fracture zone, the continental shelf, the abyssal plain, and finally, the deep trenches. His fingers traced the hydrophone connections. 23 years had taught him how the ocean lies. Layers of cold water could bend sound into ghosts, and shifting salt levels could warp the data. He checked every sensor, every connection, hunting for the source of the void. Every anomaly had a cause, and every cause had a solution. Until today. The backscatter data convulsed in a fungal eruption of light. Pixels, once discrete, bled into cellular structures, a topography of pure data growing from the abyss. Something massive bloomed across his screen. It wasn't resting on the seafloor, but appeared suspended in the water column like a sleeping god. The ADCP readings stammered. Length, 1,247 meters. Width at the thickest point, 203 meters. Depth, 3,400 meters down in the Sonar channel, a place where sound traveled forever. An error, Corbin thought. It had to be. His fingers moved with practiced economy, flying through the diagnostics, recalibrate the multi-beam array, check the beamforming algorithms, run velocity profile corrections. But nothing altered the data on his screen. It was a mountain, and it was moving. He stared at the impossible metrics. Blue whales stretched 30 meters on their best day. Giant squid might reach 40 meters if you counted every tentacle tip. Nothing in 3 billion years of evolution had built a body over a kilometer long. But the bathymetric processor disagreed. The massive signature remained, shifting through deep water with movements too deliberate for a geologic event and too fluid for any machine. Corbin's breath stopped. Not excitement, but a feeling smaller and colder. The lab's fluorescent tubes hummed overhead, their light suddenly thin against whatever pressed up from below. The ocean's silence wasn't empty space. Something was holding its breath. Act 2. Bells of Trespass. Thea Blackmore found him at dawn, still hunched over the displays. The coffee in his scripts mug was a fossil. Corbin was wrestling with the dead zone's stunning geometry, tracing its edges on the screen as if they were the shoreline of a new and hostile continent. "Tourist just got off the satellite phone with the Coast Guard," Thea said, her voice tight. She stood by the doorway, arms crossed. "They're asking all vessels in the sector for situational awareness. There's a string of disappearances." Corbin didn't look up, his attention still captive to the massive signature shifting in the deep. "Disappearances? 5 boats in the last 48 hours, she said, stepping further into the lab. Commercial fishing vessels, no beacons and no debris, they just went dark. The words hung in the air. A maritime tragedy could be just bad luck, but the silence from the hydrophones jabbed at the back of his mind. Corbin finally turned from his screen. He looked at Fear, then back at the sprawling dead zones on his map. "Where were they?" he asked, his voice low. "Let's plot their last known positions." She read the coordinates from her tablet. As she spoke, Corbin's fingers flew across his keyboard, manually plotting each point. One by one, 5 pins flared to life on the bathymetric map. Each one landed dead center in an acoustic dead zone, each a ghost in cursed ground. "Oh no," Fear whispered, seeing the pattern emerge on his screen. "It's a hunting ground," Corbin murmured. The two mysteries, his impossible reading and her missing ships, had fused. They dug into archives, looking for another catalyst. Fear found it, buried in a NOAA database. "Naval exercises," she announced, her voice strained. She brought up a new data layer, a series of polygons sprawled across the same coordinates, low-frequency active sonar. They were running LFAS trials all week, right on top of the trench. The military tests, the dead zones, the vanished ships. For Corbin, the pieces locked together like tortoise shell. "This can't be a coincidence," he said, the words a thin film in his mouth. "Coincidence isn't a variable in my datasets, Eric." Her voice was strained. She swiped to a final screen, this one showing migration tracks. Blue archipelagos of life shimmered on her display. Humpbacks, fins, sperm whales, veering away from the sonar zones in sharp, unnatural vectors. "They're fleeing," Corbin stated. "I don't think so." Fear shook her head, her eyes fixed on the chaotic lines. "This isn't fleeing. Fleeing has a destination. This is a route. Cetaceans navigate by acoustic memory, songlines older than continents. For them to abandon feeding grounds, to shatter instinct like this, it's like watching a star chart unravel. The ocean they knew is gone." The radio crackled, then exploded. "Mayday. Redemption. 38 degrees, 42 minutes north." Zia's head snapped up from her console. "Eric, the coordinates!" Corbin's eyes were already on his display. A new AIS icon flared to life on his map as the ship's system automatically plotted the transmission. It pulsed, a tiny point of light, dead center of the massive, silent signature. Captain Torres's voice came sharp over the intercom. "Redemption, this is research vessel Pelagic. Copy your mayday." The voice on the radio was a roar of shearing metal and ragged breathing. "Struck! Christ, we're breached! Something immense!" The transmission cut to a wall of static. On Corbin's screen, the icon for the Redemption winked out. Another vessel absorbed. Another signal joining the silence. Corbin looked from the blank space on the map to Thea's screen at the panicked flight of the whales. His scientific framework, the orderly lists of cause and effect, was decomposing like leaves in a rotting pond. The military acoustics created the dead water, but the whales hadn't been fleeing the noise. They were fleeing whatever the noise had awakened. Act 3. A Hymn to Hold the Night. The whale song archives stretched back 70 years. Corbin dove into the acoustic memories, driven by a gnawing inconsistency. LFAS trials had been run before without catastrophic results, which meant something was different. He pulled up hydrophone recordings from expeditions when the Pacific still sang. The lab filled with the deep, resonant calls of humpback whales from a 1953 expedition. But as he filtered out the background noise of shrimp and shifting sediment, something else emerged. "Look at this spectrogram," Thea said, her voice hushed. "Those repeating structures underneath the primary calls." She pointed to the display where the songs painted themselves in cascading blues and greens. There were harmonics and intricate, layered frequencies woven together like living architecture. More strangely, there were gaps in the main songs, Spaces that looked like deliberate voids of sound, as if the whales were singing around something immense and invisible. It's a lensing effect, Corbin theorized, his mind scrambling for a rational explanation. The gaps could be nodes of an interference pattern. They're focusing their songs to communicate across the trench. Focusing them on what, Eric? Thea counted. There's nothing there. It's just deep water. He had no answer. Each decade showed the same phenomenon. He ran the analysis. A web of acoustic energy draped itself over the Mariana Trench. Another solidified over the Kermadec and the Atacama. One by one, the song web snapped into place over every major Pacific Trench system. Eric. Thea's voice carried a tremor. She had isolated a recording from 2 weeks ago near their current position. The spectrogram was a ruin, scattered, fragmented calls from a few individuals. The intricate architecture was gone, replaced by chaos and rubble. The pattern's breaking down, she said. The coverage, it's failing. My God, he whispered. This isn't decay. It's more like an override. Something is drowning them out. He was already at his console, pulling up maritime traffic logs and seismic survey schedules, looking for anything that could produce this much acoustic force. Fear. What's the loudest thing in the water right now? USS Leviathan, she said, following his train of thought. Corbin pulled up the specs. Exactly. Look, that sonar is bouncing between 100 and 500 hertz. He looked at the spectrogram of the containment song. It's a direct overlap with the son's frequencies. Thea's face was ashen. Older sonar was just noise to them. This is a jamming signal. It'll overwrite everything else in the water. She pointed to the Leviathan's track. Its signal was a constant, methodical pulse, pinging every 6 minutes for 3 days straight, as it executed a slow, mowing the lawn pattern directly over the trench. They've been holding position, bombarding that one spot, Corbin said. Fear looked from the military data to the ancient whale recordings, the implication dawning. Wait a minute. The whales weren't building a lens, Eric, she whispered. It's more like they were building a cage. A cage. The word lingering in his mouth, a nascent threat. A cage for what? That's not a cetacean behavior. They're just whales. They don't build anything, much less prisons. Don't they? She fired back, pointing at his screen. Explain it then. Go on, explain it. What does your data tell you? His data told him she was right. The radio crackled. Captain Torres's voice cut through static from the bridge. All vessels monitoring emergency traffic. USS Leviathan has gone dark. Last transmission reported anomalous sonar returns. No beacon, no distress call, just silence where 300 sailors had been testing their weapons against the deep. A cage, Thea whispered, shaking her head as the new realization hit her. Not a cage to hold it back, a cage to keep it quiet. Her eyes widened. The songs. They're a lullaby. Corbin's scientific worldview, the rational universe he'd spent decades mapping, finally dissolved. It was not a sudden crack, but a slow decomposition, like a root system molding from within. Whales as guardians, songs as barriers. His life's work had been an act of opaque cartography. He saw it now for what it was. A jailer's inventory. He had been mapping the thickness of a prison wall from the outside, never once thinking to ask what was held within. On his sonar display, the massive signature began to shift, rising. Corbin could only stare as the depth reading ticked upward with impossible speed. The kilometer-long presence ascending through a water column that no longer remembered the song that had caged it. Act 4. The God in the Water. Dawn broke over a silent ocean. No whale spouts on the horizon, no gulls trailing the stern for scraps. The Pacific stretched away from the pelagic, a mirror of dead calm, reflecting an empty sky. The ocean had become a mausoleum of water, beautiful and sterile and wrong. The lab vibrated with a low subsonic hum that resonated in Corbin's jaw. On the main display, the massive signature had climbed past 2,500 meters, the data no longer a coherent shape but an oversaturated bloom of corrupt energy. His instruments screamed warnings, depth readings fluctuated wildly. The echo sounder painted patterns that violated every biologic principle. "This can't be right," he shuddered, trying to recalibrate systems that had never failed him before. The return signature was like a physical force overwhelming the array, flooding the system with something too dense to process. Thea's voice was a whisper of awe. "Eric, we need to see it." He nodded, eyes locked on the failing data. He grabbed his ruggedized tablet, the last link to his crumbling universe. He shoved open the heavy steel hatch and stumbled out into the cold dawn air, Thea right behind him. She pointed northeast, where USS Leviathan had vanished. The horizon seemed to bend, the line between sea and sky warping as if seen through flawed glass. "Look!" The ocean began to move. It started as a swell without cause, a hill of water rising without wind. Fish floated to the surface around the disturbance, not dead, but suspended, paralyzed by some infrasonic frequency that made the ship's hull vibrate like a tuning fork. "Jesus!" Taurus called from the bridge. "Sonar's completely saturated, something massive, directly below that disturbance." The hill became a dome. The dome became a mountain of displaced ocean, pushing upward with geological force. A wave, a moving cliff of water, detached from the bulge and rushed toward them. "Brace for impact!" Torres roared over the intercom. The ship groaned as it climbed the face of the wave, tilting at a sickening angle. Corbin was thrown hard against the rail, the impact knocking the wind from him. Thea slammed into the bulkhead beside him, her cry lost in the groan of stressed metal. Through the green-black depths, an impossible paleness began to ascend. The first tentacle broke the surface like a massive pillar ascending from the depths. Corbin's tablet slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering across the deck. The appendage rose with deliberate grace, 200 meters into the alien medium of air. Its flesh was not skin, but a vast mat of pale fibers, like neural tissue scaled to the size of a redwood forest. Sucker discs the size of manholes pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, rimmed with chitinous teeth that had evolved to grip prey larger than blue whales. A shadow fell over them, blotting out the sun. Corbin looked up, his neck craning, and saw the appendage arcing directly over the pelagic. It moved with a slow indifference, close enough that he could feel the abyssal cold radiating from its flesh. A cascade of black, oily water, older than any ocean, rained down on the deck, smelling of rank brine and deep earth minerals. For a moment, he was certain the ship would be swamped, capsized by the sheer physics of its passage. Then it was past. The ship settled, rocking violently in its wake. Fear stumbled beside him, a thin trickle of blood running from one nostril, a casualty of the subsonic pressure. He gripped the rail, knuckles white. His tablet lay on the deck where it had fallen. "Document this," a part of his brain screamed, the last echo of his training. "Pick it up, get the data." Corbin scrambled for the tablet, his hand shaking so violently he could barely grip the casing. He pawed at the screen, but the icons were a smear. He couldn't remember the sequence, or even what he was supposed to be measuring. He was just a man, on his knees, fumbling with a piece of meaningless glass as something godlike rose from the sea. "Eric," Thea's hand closed over his, stilling his frantic, useless movements. "You can stop now. It's all right." He looked up from the tablet to see another tentacle emerge, then another. He understood now. You don't take notes at the end of the world. The creature's body followed its limbs to the surface, a dome of muscle and cartilage that dominated nearly a square kilometer of ocean. It had eyes, not organs of sight, but apertures into some primordial darkness that consumed light rather than reflecting it. When they turned toward the pelagic, Corbin felt his scientific worldview simply tear away like tissue paper. This thing had been dreaming in the deep since the first cells learned photosynthesis. It had watched from its abyssal throne as continents drifted and mountains rose. Every measurement Corbin had ever made, every chart he'd drawn, all of his confident predictions amounted to nothing but the work of an ant mapping the surface of a sleeping giant. From the west, a new sound cut through the infrasonic hum. Not a song, but a sharp, resonant trumpet, a call to arms. A small pod of humpbacks, the largest and most scarred he had ever seen, their flanks crisscrossed with ancient wounds that spoke of predators and a long and violent duty. They were returning. "They're not charging," Corbin breathed, a horrifying new understanding dawning. "They're being recalled. It's an instinct." He watched as they unleashed their songs, a final, defiant chorus aimed directly at the entity. It was the sound of 1,000 generations of duty converging in one hopeless, suicidal stand. But the ancient calls that had once been powerful enough to cage a god now sounded like children's whispers in a hurricane. The tentacles descended with an almost dismissive precision, wrapping around the ancient guardians. The songs stopped. Not cut off, but unraveled, their acoustic energy drawn into the greater presence, like thread from a spool. "It's feeding," sobbed Thea, horrified. "No, not feeding," Corbin said, his voice hollow. "It's reclaiming the world." Entangled in its fibrous flesh were the mangled remains of the USS Leviathan. A hull plate was twisted into sculpture, a propeller shaft scraped against a limb with every movement. Its head rose higher, revealing a beak that could shear a nuclear sub like wet bone, and then it issued its call. A subsonic vibration that shattered the last of Corbin's instruments and seemed to unmake the very air he breathed. "It means nothing," Corbin whispered, staring at his broken equipment. 23 years of mapping, measuring, cataloging. I thought I understood the ocean. I thought I knew." His voice trailed off. The numbers that had defined his life, the precise measurements that had given him purpose and rationality, meant nothing to a being that had been ancient when the first whale song echoed through primordial seas. The creature began to sink back into the depths, its message delivered. This was an announcement that the ocean had older tenants. Humanity's acoustic violence had awakened a landlord that recognized no sovereignty but depth and time and the patient hunger of geological ages. As the last ripple vanished, the Pacific returned to its terrible calm, but the silence was different now. "I'm deleting everything," Fia said, her voice flat as she stared at her cracked tablet. "The acoustic files, the sonar logs, all of it." "Why?" Corbin managed. "Because it's not data anymore," she said numbly. Her thumb swiped across the screen. "It's a eulogy for the ocean we thought we knew." They walked back to the lab with mechanical steps. Corbin looked at his shattered instruments, at the screens that could never again display measurements he trusted. "You're right," he said to her. "There's nothing left to measure." Corbin cut the power, and the hum of the lab servers died. Screens went dark. In the sudden quiet, he could hear it. The ocean, breathing, waiting. The abyss was awake now, and it was listening. And so, you emerge from the crushing depths, where ancient things grow weary of our acoustic trespassing. How refreshingly efficient. The creature didn't attack humanity, it simply demonstrated proper oceanic hierarchy. Dr. Corbin spent his career stealing secrets from the deep, parasitically harvesting data from a realm that never consented to his surveillance. The military sonar wasn't an accident. It was the final straw for a landlord who had been extraordinarily patient with some very destructive tenants. The whales weren't guardians protecting us. They were middle management, desperately trying to keep their chaotic human charges from disturbing upper management. So I wonder, what other evolutionary corrections are overdue? Your mortal foibles provide such amusing data. Farewell, my children of the night. Until next time, this is Nocturne saying, your dreams have been harvested, processed, and filed in the appropriate section of the Codex. Nothing is ever wasted.